Meir Sheetrit from the Kadima Party in Israel, from the Knesset. Thank you very much for coming to WPC TV. An obvious question is that since you live in a difficult part of the world, how do you see the so-called Arab Spring, which perhaps should be called Arab Awakening, and how do you feel Israel is reacting to it, and how should it react to it?
All right. First, you know that spring comes after winter. And what the people call Arab Spring, I think more accurate to say it's Arab winter. Because as a matter of fact, when the young people in the Arab states, including Egypt, for example, went to the streets, they went because they have no hope for their future. People who finish university doesn't have jobs. Yeah. 40 million Egyptians were living on $2 a day. And when they see in their own home country the situation of a very small group of people, very, very rich, while they don't have food, that makes them very angry. Secondly, the world became to be open. It's a global world, and they see what's going on in different other countries, so they cannot accept their situation. Therefore, they went to the street, hoping that by this kind of revolution, they will change the situation. I predicted at that time, almost 2 years ago, that we will see quite shortly, within 1 year or two, another revolution against the Islamic new governments. Why? Because the Islamic brothers in Egypt, for example, were the only one who were well organized, have the money, have the experience to run and sweep the people to elect them. And they had been elected in Egypt, in different places. The problem is the situation of the average Egyptian today, after 2 years since Mubarak left, became worse. They don't have $2 a day, they have $1 a day. And the situation became much more difficult. That's the reason why we're starting to see now again demonstrations in Egypt against Morsi and against his own regime. That maybe will lead to spring. Why? Because now maybe they're coming to conclusion that Islam Brothers does not giving an answer. They need really the liberal powers of Egypt to make a real democracy and a real change in their lives. While Egypt is still buying every year $2 billion weapon against whom? Instead of using it for social, educational, housing problems in Egypt. So I expect such things will happen, in my opinion, again and again in different places. Now, how Israel react to that? We have been very worried. We have from one side hope that really they're going to make change, democratic change in those countries, which will make much better relation between Israel and those countries. On the other side, of course, we took in consideration that the Islam Brothers and the Islamic movements are not really like Israel. And if Morsi did not, until today, almost never say the word Israel from his mouth, that give you an example what kind of feeling there are in the streets. Still, it creates some kind of chances. Because now we see that all the Arab around us, all the states around us become Islamic, controlled by Islamic. That opened a door of opportunity maybe to develop a new connection with those Arabs. We had to find a way how to make connection with them, how to open our doors and their doors to real negotiation and to real peace. And I believe personally that what we should do is to pick up at last what I call this Arab initiative or the Saudi initiative.
The Saudi initiative, yes.
I'm the biggest supporter of the Arab initiative, believing that the only way to make peace with the Palestinians is through the Arab initiative. Why? Because no Palestinian leader alone will sign agreement with Israel because he has to pay his own part, even if we agree to give them a state on the basis of 67 borders, because he has to give up what they call the right of return. And no Palestinian leader alone will do it unless he has the support of all the Arab states. Now, if the Arab states, 56 Islam countries, sign this initiative, approve it 4 times, calling for Israel to go ahead. I tried to convince Ariel Sharon, Olmert, I brought it as a minister to the cabinet, to the security cabinet, Livni, Olmert, Bibi, this term, to say, guys, let's come on, let's pick up this initiative and say to the Arab world, let's negotiate on your initiative.
But I get the feeling that Bibi Netanyahu would never accept this. And if you look at the settlements policy, this seems to be completely contrary to what you have in mind.
Exactly. This government is, in my opinion, acting in counterproductive way. And I think that if he was clever, that's what we should do. I believe that we have in our country a paradox that I call it the hawks of peace and the doves of war, which mean only hawks can make peace with the national consensus, like Begin did with Egypt.
Yes.
And if
Sharon tried.
And Sharon did. He changed his own. I was with Sharon in Kadima.
Yeah.
If Bibi will go ahead to peace and really make a decision to go, for example, to this initiative, it will pass in large majority in the Knesset and in the public of Israel, because automatically you will have the support of the left and the center.
Can you see that happening though?
I hope so.
I mean, you know Netanyahu.
I know Netanyahu very well.
Yeah.
I worked with him. I have been Minister of Finance in his government when he was Prime Minister. And we have been together in the Finance Ministry in 2003 and 2004 when we make a revolution in the economy of Israel, which was at the time in rain, and we changed it upside down. So we are very good friends. Sometimes I have the impression that if he wants, he can.
Yeah.
He did it when he became first Prime Minister. Yeah. For example, he signed the Y agreement. He went out of Hebron,
yes,
which the Labour Party was afraid to do. So there is small hope that I try to push it ahead all the time.
A last question, because I know this is something that Benjamin Netanyahu feels very strongly about, and this is Iran and the potential that Iran will get nuclear weapons. Now, I mean, Jacques Chirac, some years ago, said, you know, the world will have to live with an uranium bomb. And that was sort of, maybe that was realistic.
I don't think so.
What is the alternative? I mean, can you see in the next few months an attack by Israel with or without America on Iran? And would it help?
First, let me say that I don't accept the attitude of Mr. Chirac. Iran, nuclear Iran, it's very dangerous not only to Israel, it's dangerous to Israel, but it's dangerous to all the free world.
And there will be proliferation there because Saudis, the Turks, everybody, yes.
And the most problem with that, with Iran, is not only proliferation, but that this weapon will be in the hands of terrorists, which they can use it everywhere. That's the problem. Tomorrow they can find yourself fighting against a group of terrorists in the United States or in Europe using a nuclear weapon. That will change the world. Secondly, it will change all the Middle East. It will lose all the American influence on all the Arab states in the Middle East. So it is an interest of Israel to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, as well as it is an interest of the free world and of the United States to prevent it. I prefer that if action should be taken, that should be done by the United States and the international community, not by Israel. We are very small. Unless we are in a situation that we have no other way. I hope that the diplomatic efforts and the sanctions will work and Iran will go back from its own intention. But if not, this kind of action should be done by the United States. They are the only one who have the ability to do it again and again and again as far as is needed. Israel cannot. Israel maybe can make an attack once,
yes,
and I don't know about the future afterwards. I don't think we should be responsible to act against Iran.
Just on that point, if you look back at the American election, opinion polls showed that everywhere in the world basically wanted Obama to win, with the exception of Israel. I mean, do you think there is a genuine and pernicious personality clash between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
So when you say exception of Israel, it's not exception of Israel, it's exception of the Prime Minister of Israel. Okay? Because he was supporting Romney, which I think is a mistake. Yeah. Because you cannot take a stance in elections in different countries. It doesn't matter what will be the results. I think that Obama overcome it. And there was some kind of tension between the two people. Obama was one of the big friends of Israel during the last term. He helped us in many ways. And I believe he will do the same in the future. I believe that Obama, during the election, made a strong commitment that he will prevent Iran from being nuclear. And not because of the interest of Israel, but because of the interest of the United States. As I said before, if Iran will be nuclear, the United States will lose all the Arab world in the Middle East, which will be a disaster.
Meir Sheetrit, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.